Welcome to the Perinatal Wellness Podcast, a space dedicated to supporting your mental and emotional well-being through pregnancy and early parenthood. I'm Courtney Schroeder, a licensed therapist, perinatal mental health specialist, and fellow mom. If you are looking for practical tools, helpful guidance, and meaningful conversations to help you feel like yourself again and find more presence and joy in this season of life, you are in the right place. Now let's get into today's episode. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Today we are going to be talking all about worry, and we're going to be talking about how to manage worry during pregnancy and the postpartum period, and I want to give you some really concrete things you can do to help reduce worry. And worry is something that all of us experience during this time to some degree, and for good reason. If you think about it, we basically have this combination of having something we really care about, our baby, whether they're already born or you're pregnant or trying to get pregnant or wanting a baby, mixed with many opportunities to experience uncertainty. Will my baby be healthy? How will labor and delivery go? What if I'm pregnant and have deli meat, but I didn't heat it up first? Is that going to hurt my baby? How is all of this going to impact my relationship with my partner, my friends, or work and sense of self? And what kind of parent am I going to be? So this combination of having something that we really want, value, and care about mixed with so much uncertainty can understandably be a recipe for worry because we worry about the things that we care about. So if we're talking about reducing worry, it can be helpful to start by just discussing what worry is. So you may be thinking, trust me, I know what worry is. But there are a few key elements here that I want you to think about that we do usually see with worry. And so for one, worries are typically focused on the future. We worry about things that haven't happened yet. And they are often catastrophic in nature or involve the worst case scenario our brain can come up with. And they often disregard or discount our own ability to cope with the feared outcomes. And when we're referring to worry, we're talking about that mental dwelling on something, anxiously thinking about something kind of over and over, but not really having progress in terms of problem solving. So let's explore some things that you can do if you would like to worry a little bit less. So the first one is ask yourself, WTF, for what's the function? And I have to credit my husband for that one, who's also a therapist. So as a therapist myself, when I'm discussing a thought pattern, feeling, or behavior that someone wants to change, I like to begin by asking, what is the function or purpose of this in the first place? Is there a part of us that actually thinks that this is helpful in some way, even if it's creating suffering for us? And we can start getting to the bottom of that question by asking, what would be the worst part of not, and then fill in the blank with whatever it is you want to change. So for example, what would be the worst part of not worrying about labor and delivery anymore? This might feel like a strange question, but if you want, I encourage you to pause for a moment and see what comes up for you if you think about some of the main things that you have been worrying about recently. And the thing about worry is that it can feel both protective and productive. And we may think on some level that it would be too unbearable to be caught off guard by something bad happening. But if we're already worrying and stressed and something bad happens, it doesn't feel like as much of a contrast in how we feel. Like we're not falling from as high of a place as we were before. And this is actually called the contrast avoidance model, sometimes used to explain chronic anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, worrying especially. And the cost of this, however, is that worry can be exhausting, right? And often the things we worry about don't happen, and it can take us away from being present with what we have in the moment and put a lot of internal focus on outcomes that we're afraid of that haven't even happened. And like I said, worrying can also feel productive, even when it's not. Part of us can think that somehow worrying about something feels like it's getting us somewhere, when in reality, it may not actually be getting us closer to a solution or some sort of helpful next step. And remember, we worry about things that feel uncertain, and we want to restore a sense of control. And worrying can kind of give us an illusion that we're somehow working towards controlling things or having more certainty. Now, there are times when worry can prompt productive behavior, especially if it involves maybe something that's going to happen in the near future and that we can actually have some influence over. But for things that are maybe farther out in the future and that we can't really do much about at this point, feeling like we're getting some control by worrying can surely come with some costs. And understanding what the underlying function might be to our worrying can be a helpful first step here. And there's nothing shameful about having part of you that might actually want to worry about some things, because our brains are always trying to be on our side to protect us or help us some way. But sometimes that strategy may not be as helpful as originally intended. So the second strategy I want to share is to take necessary action. So when we're reflecting on the why or the function behind the worries, we may realize actually this is helping motivate me to do something about my concerns. And so before we get into the rest of the strategies, we want to see if there's anything we actually can do that would be helpful. And as I mentioned a moment ago, this is most likely going to be the case when something is happening now or soon and that you can actually have influence over. So if your child is starting to crawl and you're worried about them falling down the stairs, looks like it's time for a baby gate, right? We wouldn't just worry about that and try to cope with the anxious thoughts. We would do something about that. Now, we may not be able to take action if something is farther out in the future, generally unlikely, or not something that we can really control. Those are the types of worries that we'll have in mind as we move forward discussing strategies. Now, another example may be if you're worrying about labor and delivery quite a bit. This may be, depending on where you're at in your pregnancy, still a bit far out in the future, but it might be worth having some more conversations with your midwife or your OB about your concerns, coming up with some sort of plan, channeling that energy into figuring out what you can learn or what you can plan for or what you can do about your upcoming labor and delivery, rather than just focusing only on how do I manage these anxious thoughts. So really the whole point of this step is let's assess what can we do, if anything, first, and then moving forward with the following strategies, how we can apply those to worries that really otherwise are mostly just causing us psychological distress. The next strategy I want to share is scheduling worry time. So as we discussed, there may be part of your brain that actually wants to worry. So it can be more productive to schedule designated time to worry rather than jumping into trying not to worry at all. And how this works is you can schedule a time, maybe 20 to 30 minutes during your day, that's just dedicated to worrying. And you can put it on your calendar, set an alarm on your phone, and plan for it. And when a worry comes up throughout the day, you can save it for your worry time. And you may even find it helpful to write it down somewhere just to send that signal to your brain. We got this, we're saving it, we're going to be worrying about it soon. And it may sound silly, but this can actually work. And not only does this help that part of you that believes worrying is productive to relax a little bit, but it also helps you to get more in the practice with redirecting your focus away from worries. So it's no secret, right, that worrying can be really distracting and take us out of the moment. And as you do this more, you're kind of building that mental muscle of identifying a worry and setting it aside and focusing on the here and now. And then that might allow you to get some much needed rest or be able to be more present with your child or get a task done that you wanted to complete or whatever it might be. And then when worry time comes, choose a spot that you don't associate with rest or comfort. So we don't want you to sit or lie in bed or on your favorite spot to unwind on the couch. Maybe a spot in the house that's a little bit more neutral or that you don't have as many associations with. And then when worry time comes, you can worry and evaluate the thoughts that you've saved for worry time. Or when worry time comes, maybe you decide, actually, this is pretty nice not focusing on worries so much today. And I'm going to not take my worry time today, but maybe return to this idea tomorrow and continue saving my worries for a future worry time. And that's okay too. The fourth strategy I have for you is to generate alternative possibilities. So, as we mentioned, when we worry, we're typically envisioning our worst case scenario. And often our worst case scenarios have a low probability of happening, even though it may seem likely or certain. So for this exercise, I want to invite you to think of maybe 2 or 3 additional possible outcomes in addition to the one you're already picturing. So let's walk through an example. So let's say you're pregnant and you're in your second trimester and it feels like you haven't noticed fetal movement for a while. Maybe the worry might be the baby hasn't moved today, something must be wrong. And so, of course, first, if you have any concerns, right, thinking about what is a helpful action I can take, reaching out to triage or your midwife or OB. So let's say you've been seen by somebody, or maybe you've been able to talk to a nurse on the phone. You've gotten the help that you need. And at this point, you've gotten reassurance that things are looking okay. But maybe at this point, you're just feeling really anxious about it and just wanting to find a way to tone down those anxious thoughts. So a couple other alternative possibilities may be that you've had a busy day, you've been moving around more, so maybe you haven't noticed movement as much, and perhaps you've been distracted because you're busy. Or another possibility may be that your baby has been sleeping or has been moving, but is in a position where it's not as obvious to you or easy to feel. So when you have a list of a few alternative possibilities, notice the likelihood of each of these possibilities. Are the alternatives you've come up with more likely than the worst case scenario? And often that is the case, even though that worst case scenario can feel so convincing. So this exercise helps us really look for that gray area and step out of the black and white thinking that can drive our anxiety. The fifth strategy I want to share with you is considering how you would cope if the thing that you're worried about did happen. And now I'm not denying the fact that sometimes the outcomes we're worried about are things that would truly be tragic, like a child dying of SIDS. And I'm not pretending that simply remembering our coping skills would change that. What I am saying is that sometimes we forget our own strength and resources, and remembering these in certain cases can be really helpful. So if you do find yourself worrying, ask yourself, have I gone through that before or something similar? How did I deal with it? Or more broadly, how have I gotten through hard times in the past? How did I take care of myself? Who is in my support system who I can count on to step up? What other sources of support might I be able to tap into or lean on if needed? And if you're listening to this episode right now, you have literally gotten through every single day of your life so far, and I'm sure you have been through some hard things. And here you are, that same heart is still beating, your lungs are still breathing, and you are strong and you can get through hard things. And so sometimes a helpful coping strategy can be to remember our resources and our own strength. And finally, the last strategy that I wanted to share with you is working on increasing our capacity to accept uncertainty as part of life. And as a mom, I think one of the bigger challenges I've realized that I think probably each one of us faces as human beings, I know I certainly do, is how can we love as fully and as deeply as possible in a life filled with so much uncertainty? How can we have the courage to be as present as we can be with what we have now, health, family, whatever it may be, knowing that none of us are exempt from change and loss? And sometimes the closest thing we can have to certainty is just being with what we have in this present moment. We know that the here and now is what it is. We have what we have right now. And uncertainty is part of life. And when we can begin to find more acceptance for this fact instead of fighting against it, we can put more energy towards what matters most to us. Something that I'll also kind of add here as an aside is when we're worrying about something, sometimes I tell people, give it 24 hours and see if you're still as worried about this thing as you are now. Sometimes we're still worried about the same things, and it's not like this is a cure-all by any means, but sometimes after we give something a day, especially if it's a new worry, or especially maybe a rumination about the way we said something funny to somebody else, we're really thinking about what did they think of us and how did that come off? Sometimes there's certain worries that we just need to give a little bit of time for, and they also can dissipate on their own. So take it or leave it, but that's another thing I just thought I would add in here at the end. So I hope you found this episode helpful and that you learned something new. If you are looking for more resources about dealing with worry or anxiety, especially during the perinatal period, I am going to have a link in the show notes to a workbook that I recommend that you may want to check out that's really focused on anxiety during pregnancy and postpartum. So please feel free to check that out if you think that it would be helpful. I will also have some main bullet points from today's episode on my blog if you would like just a little bit of a recap or are more of a visual person. So thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to pass this along to a friend who may find it helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye.